Hello and welcome to Australia Wide. I'm Matt Wordsworth. On the show this week, the West Australian government accused of failing to protect Aboriginal sacred sites.
It seems to me that there's a concerted effort to diminish Aboriginal cultural heritage protection in WA, facilitate resource development sector business.
Saving Tasmania's heritage churches.
The last 15 years, about 40 churches have closed.
We thought we just can't let this happen. It's an important building.
And preserving the mighty Wurlitzer.
This is industrial scale music.
Yeah, it is huge. A lot of real estate involved with these instruments.
First though, it's one of Australia's most secure sites and home to the nation's only nuclear reactor. But little is known about what goes on at the Lucas Heights facility, beyond the questions over what to do with its hazardous waste. The Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation is marking a significant milestone, the production of its 4 millionth dose of nuclear medicine. Our reporter Philippa McDonald got a rare look at the work going on inside the Lucas Heights nuclear reactor.
For almost 2 years, the Weir family have been walking these corridors. For half her short life, Evie has been battling cancer, and this facility provides her with the critical diagnostics she needs.
A week after her second birthday, we were transferred here and she got diagnosed with neuroblastoma. It was stage 4, so it meant she had the tumour in her adrenal gland, but she also had spread throughout her body and in her bone marrow.
Evie Weir has had chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, a bone marrow transplant and immunotherapy.
Scan days are always, hard until you get, those results. You just don't know. So we're just really hoping that, the drugs have been working and it's all been worth it.
So we're just looking at the abdominal view here.
The head of nuclear medicine at the Children's Hospital Westmead, Professor Robert Harmon-Giles, has been keeping a close eye on Evie's progress. It's estimated 1 in 2 Australians will require a nuclear medicine diagnosis or treatment during their lifetime.
The evolution of new technology has been really quite superb, and we're learning more and more how different cancers, for example, respond, how they grow, how quickly they grow, how well we're actually doing when we're treating them. So all those things are really fantastic because that dictates then what the protocol for their treatment is.
Australia entered the nuclear age in 1958 with the opening of the Lucas Heights or Haifa reactor. And through this facility, which includes a newer reactor called Opal, Australia has become a major producer of nuclear medicine using low-enriched uranium.
The fundamentals of a reactor safety are keeping the core cool, controlling the fission process and containing any radioactive contamination. And we are in an environment that is steel and concrete construction that is a physical barrier between us and the surrounding environment.
Right here is almost $500 million of critical infrastructure.
So what if a small plane flew into the cage, it would be repelled, what would happen?
Yeah, so there is a protective barrier around the reactor building, and that barrier is designed to international standards whereby it would repel a light aircraft collision if that were to take place.
So a lot of people think back, it's not that long ago, to Japan, an earthquake. How safe is this? Because the reactors in Japan were thought to be safe.
Yeah, we're very safe here. I mean, Fukushima incident was a very large seismic event followed by very large tidal waves. The ground we're on now is very stable from a geological point of view. We are several kilometres from the coast, so having that same scenario occur here is not a credible scenario.
It may not be a credible scenario, but there are plenty of people who remain opposed to the facility. Over decades, neighbours and anti-nuclear campaigners have blockaded Lucas Heights. In 2001, Greenpeace campaigners managed to get behind the high-security wire. Friends of the Earth have been one of the most outspoken critics of Australia's nuclear reactor.
They don't really have anywhere to dispose of this waste, so they're going to store it at Lucas Heights as an interim arrangement, and that will be for no longer than 5 years.
Nuclear waste has in the past been shipped to France for reprocessing. Sometime this year, much of that intermediate level waste will be returned to Lucas Heights for storage.
So it's a long process, but it's very well managed. It's not a novel process. It's done right around the world with other reactor facilities. So we just do what best practice is.
Much of the waste comes from the production of nuclear medicine, which is part of ANSTO's core business. Production starts here. Uranium alloy is bombarded by neutrons for almost 2 weeks and cooled in the storage pool.
Molybdenum is used and turns into technetium, and it's used in 80% of all nuclear medicines globally. And if you think about the fact that we lose 20% of our product every day through decay, we have to get it produced and out the door as quickly as possible.
Right now, Australia produces more than 500,000 doses of nuclear medicine a year, and it's just reached a significant milestone.
We are now this month producing our 4 millionth patient dose of nuclear medicine.
But critics say Australia is lagging behind countries like Canada, which are starting to bypass nuclear reactors altogether.
Cyclotrons are fundamentally preferable to research reactors because they're much safer, they can't be used for weapons production. So those are the main reasons why we should look to cyclotron production of medical isotopes.
We're certainly aware of that competition, and in fact I've visited some of the facilities in Canada to see where they're at. It's technically possible to make this product with a cyclotron, which is one of the other methods for producing it. However, it's not really commercially viable.
ANSTO is investing in a new nuclear medicine production plant, and it's talking big, increasing production to 10 to 13 million doses a year to become one of the world's big 3 producers of nuclear medicine.
We recently, last year, had a big problem worldwide where people could not get the technetium because of these reactors getting very old and not being able to produce what was needed throughout the US and Europe. So I think it's actually a very good thing to be able to have this facility so close to us, receive a very reliable source of technetium, and I understand that it's going to be supplying quite a lot of technetium through the moly production worldwide.
That means more life-saving treatment for patients like Evie Weir.
She'll have scans for 5 years and then follow-ups annually pretty much for the rest of her life. When you have a baby, you hope and dream that so much for them, and I still have those hopes for Evie. I still want to see her graduate from school and get married and all of the things that you dream about. She's just taught us so much throughout the journey, just how she's gone through, you know, such traumatic experiences just with such grace, and that's actually her middle name, so Evie Grace.
Philippa McDonald in Sydney. Now to a battle over Aboriginal sacred sites, and there's outrage in Western Australia that over 20 areas of land and water have been scrapped from the state's heritage register. Aboriginal communities are accusing the government of giving in to pressure from mining companies and developers. But the government is defending its track record and is pushing ahead with controversial reforms to the laws that protect the sites. Claire Moody reports.
At Collie River in Western Australia's southwest, Joe Northover is greeting the serpent.
This is the resting site for the Ngā Kangaroo. This is where his spirit rests here. His head in the pool, this part, and his body lying down that way.
A Noongar man, he's considered to be a custodian of this spiritual place.
He's the one that created all the rivers and the creeks and all the waterways, because it's his spirit that dwells in there.
This is also coal mining country, And over the years, Joe Northover has taken a stand against developments that he believes would have harmed the river.
This is where I opposed the mining several years ago.
The whole river, 150 kilometres of it, used to be protected under WA's Register of Aboriginal Sites. But last year, Joe Northover found out it was being scrapped from the list.
It knocked me for six. You know, I was really crook spiritually wise, and it was just a sad time.
Collie River is one of 22 sites that the WA government has confirmed have been removed from the state register over the past 4 years. Many have been removed under a new guideline that said sacred sites must be devoted to religious use rather than subject to mythological story, song or belief.
Whoever wrote that certainly is coming from a Christian religious viewpoint, in my opinion.
Clayton Lewis has set up a lobby group to fight the changes. A sacred site on his own traditional country has also been removed from the register.
It seems to me that there's a concerted effort to diminish Aboriginal cultural heritage protection in WA.
I believe that all government has failed Aboriginal people since colonisation.
With the WA government already facing a backlash over the possible closure of remote Aboriginal communities, Clayton Lewis has been pointing to a bigger agenda.
Big state out there in WA and plenty of mining business happening around the place. And if you don't have traditional owners on country, it's more or less open slather.
Archaeology student Liz Vaughan is one of the founders of the Heritage Action Alliance. Her soon-to-be-published thesis includes documents obtained under Freedom of Information showing pressure by mining companies to have sites delisted or not registered in the first place.
You've got a case where a site is registered, so it has legally been determined as being important under the Act. Then you've got mining companies lobbying the government, the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, for the removal of that site, and they've done it.
In April, traditional owners had a win over this deregistered site covering waters and creeks at Port Hedland in WA's Pilbara. The site had been delisted following an application to build new berths and dredge the harbour, but the Supreme Court quashed the decision.
It's a large body of water, but that doesn't mean you don't protect it and that you don't recognise its importance and significances to Aboriginal people.
The lawyer who represented the traditional owners, Greg McIntyre, also led the historic Mabo native title case. He says all other sites that have been deregistered under the same criteria should now be put back onto the register. The state government says it's reviewing the sites and it's defending its track record on Aboriginal heritage.
Your critics say, though, that you're pandering to the mining industry. What's your response to that?
Well, that is not true. That is simply not true. You know, I have a deep personal regard for Aboriginal people, and I would never diminish the rights of Aboriginal people or consultation with Aboriginal people with regard to their heritage.
Shame! And it is shame! Shame!
Shame!
But the dispute over sacred sites comes as the government pushes for sweeping changes to the laws set up to protect them, changes that have the backing of the mining industry.
Unfortunately, the whole cost of cultural heritage has sadly escalated over recent years to a point now where it's becoming unaffordable.
The industry supports the amendments to WA's Aboriginal Heritage Act. It wants an end to the existing system that it says mainly benefits consultants and lawyers and causes unnecessary delays.
A recent report by Department of Aboriginal Affairs has demonstrated the huge cost of Aboriginal heritage survey reports. Some $380,000 is spent on average, and only $42,000 of that is flowing directly to consultation with Aboriginal elders.
Under the proposed changes to the Act, penalties for damaging or destroying sites are increased. But the bill also gives most of the decision-making power to one senior bureaucrat at DAA, the Department of Aboriginal Affairs.
We are not trying to diminish Aboriginal heritage. We're not trying to alienate Aboriginal people. We're including Aboriginal people as we always have, but at the same time we're streamlining the process. We are refining and reforming a piece of legislation that is 40 years old.
But opponents say the changes are offensive because there's nothing in the legislation that guarantees consultation with Aboriginal people.
the Act at the very least should be sent to a parliamentary select committee where these issues can be worked out with experts.
Under pressure from industry on one side and Aboriginal communities on the other, the government says it's trying to be fair to both. Clayton Lewis says it must get the balance right if it's to restore faith.
You have this asset. Some people regard it as a commodity, some people think it's rubbish, depending who you speak to, but it's my culture and it's wider Aboriginal culture. So if it's held by the state and being disregarded and thrown in the bin, destroyed, well, I'll remove it from the state. And if it means challenging the state government and going to DAA and saying we want all of our intellectual property, we'll take them on.
Well, I hope they're not playing politics, because it should be above politics. The Department of Aboriginal Affairs is established and exists entirely for the benefit of Aboriginal people. That has not changed.
Back at Collie River, Joe Northover is yet to be convinced.
Where is there fairness and equality? There's two cultures in this country. The current government, I'm sad for.
Claire Moody reporting from Perth. The steady decline in the numbers of Australians attending church is having an effect on some of the nation's heritage buildings. Many churches are forced to close their doors. Sometimes they're sold off to be turned into homes or offices, but often they fall into disrepair. One Tasmanian town is determined to buck all those trends and preserve a small but important piece of its history. Ellie Ward reports.
What were you saying about the graveyard over there, to fence it right around?
Well, the consensus of the meeting that day was that we fence right around.
After being threatened with the closure of its historic church, the small community of Buckland in Tasmania's east is busy planning future events.
We thought we just can't let this happen. It's an important building for Buckland.
The grounds of the historic church are kept spick and span and the church replenished with fresh flowers.
The potential was there for it to close because of the lack of attendees.
Rector Trevor Smith hasn't conducted a wedding at the church during his 2.5 years here.
To have this building and this surrounds, you need to have the community involved.
There have been no weekly services for years, and even quarterly ones only managed to attract a small congregation. It wasn't just the lack of attendees, but asbestos roof tiles.
And it was to be closed. We found that by fixing the asbestos tiles, which are at a very steep pitch, and only 3 of them had moved and some flashing to the belfry, that the church was able to be watertight again.
Completed in 1850, the church is based on a mid-14th century design. The centrepiece is the Gothic horror window.
It's the goriest window in 19th century churches. It shows the body of St John minus its head, the body is spurting blood, and Salome, who requested from her father Herod, has got his head on a platter.
The church is largely original, including the blackwood pews and the stone window frames. While it will still be used for worship, the church will open for other community events, including this year's Festival of Voices.
And I went in, and I'm a singer myself, and I was on my own, and I belted out a song, and I was, oh wow, this is fantastic, you know, and it seats about 100, 120 people, and I thought, there needs to be some concerts here.
I sometimes wonder whether the can-do attitude is dying in Australia. I think we're all getting too obedient.
It was Douglas Blaine's idea to open up the church for alternative uses. He was a founding member of the Spitalfields Trust in England, which has preserved hundreds of historic properties there.
We used rather adventurous means. I think I was the kind of can-do factor, the Aussie. I said, for God's sake, it's obvious, break in and squat there. And that's what we did.
The head of the Anglican Church in Tasmania, Bishop John Harrower, welcomes the involvement of communities in saving their local church.
Since I've been bishop, the last 15 years, about 40 churches have closed, Anglican churches and church buildings have closed, yeah.
The church has just done a statewide audit, and Bishop Harrower warns the cost of maintenance and the need to comply with health and safety regulations means more are likely to close in the near future.
Some of those local communities are going to struggle to make those repairs and renovations.
The cost of maintaining the Anglican Holy Trinity Church in North Hobart led to its sale a few years ago. Purchased by the Greek Orthodox Church for $50,000, the new owners knew it came with a hefty repair bill. Peter Freeman led the development of a conservation management plan for the building.
In terms of the pantheon of religious buildings in Tasmania, it has to be one of the most significant of all. I mean, St David's, for instance, is not quite as significant because it's been altered all through its life.
Mr Freeman says the plan identified that around $2 million needed to be spent.
I know of no work that's been done. As you can see from the walls and the garden wall, it's in a very poor condition.
He argues that makes it dangerous. The Greek Orthodox Church denies the building is dangerous and says significant works have been done on the roof. It says the next focus will be on the front of the building and the tower, but that it will depend on funds and that fundraising will be required. Hobart's Lord Mayor wants a meeting with them.
I think it's been around since 2008 that it was first bought, and there were promises that it was going to be done up, and it's very disappointing that it's just decaying in front of our eyes.
Douglas Blaine believes Tasmania's built heritage is undervalued as a tourism asset.
Art connoisseurs from all over the world simply have to see Mona or they haven't done their job. And those people want to see more than just Mona. They want to enjoy other aspects of Tasmania. And one of their common interests tends to be architecture. And that means there's new emphasis, I think, on the buildings.
Airlie Ward in Hobart. The theatre organ used to be a fixture of Australian cinemas, accompanying silent movies and entertaining audiences between films. It fell out of favour in the 1950s with the arrival of television, but it can still be seen and, more importantly, heard around the country thanks to the efforts of the Theatre Organ Society of Australia. Andrew Bell dropped by a suburban town hall in Melbourne's southeast to take a look.
It's a sound that was once familiar, but is now rarely heard. And it's a sight like no other. The mighty Wurlitzer.
I would go to a theatre in the city, and first thing I'd ask before I bought a ticket was the organ playing that night.
John McLennan and Julian Arnold fell in love with the theatre organ in its heyday, when it was a star attraction at many movie theatres.
I remember it as a kid. I'd go in there, as a 14, 15-year-old, at a matinee on a Saturday. The organ used to come up out of the pit and rotate. It was on a rotating lift, and the organist was, reasonable. He wasn't a top drawer, but I used to think it was absolutely sensational.
As first an accompaniment to silent movies, then as an interval entertainment, the theatre organ had the lot.
You can make the music do whatever you want it to do with one of these instruments.
This particular instrument arrived at Melbourne State Theatre from Chicago in February 1929. It was acclaimed as the greatest instrument of its kind in Australia. But by the 50s, it was rarely heard. And by the 60s...
A private person had bought the organ out of the theatre, and it got bigger in the garage and bigger, and it just was beyond him. So he wanted to sell it.
It eventually ended up at the Moorabbin Town Hall in Melbourne's southeast. And after an 18-month restoration project...
It was late nights and it was weekends
all day
as well.
Saturdays?
Yeah, all day Saturdays, yes. Yeah. But these are an unknown quantity when you say, we're going to put it in here. We don't know how it's going to sound until we set it up. We know how it sounded in the State Theatre in the city, But how it's going to sound here with these four walls, we're not sure.
It sounded good then, and almost half a century later, it still does.
The instrument represents, I think, the pinnacle of mechanical musical ingenuity, where one man can actually be a full conductor, like for argument's sake, if I wanted to play a nice big chord. Or some nice little strings. So basically, when you play this thing, you have the ability to become an entire orchestra, which you can't do on a standard organ.
But there's much more to it than just this.
Oh, absolutely. This is just the control centre. What really goes on is what happens behind the scenes. Let's go and have a look.
Yeah, come on. Is it as colourful and as impressive as...
It is amazing. You'll love it.
Lead on. So here we are, high above the stage.
2 floors to be precise.
And what have we here?
This is the solo organ chamber. This is the business end of the organ, basically.
And what a business. How many pipes?
I think the last count, 1,482, or thereabouts. And you've got half the organ in here, all the big brassy stuff and the trumpets and the saxophone, which are over there.
Into the next room?
Into the next room. This is the smallest of the 3 chambers.
And what's in here?
Right, well this is our percussion chamber, where we have all our percussive instruments. There's a marimba harp there, and
there's plenty above too.
Oh, there's plenty above. There's xylophone, glockenspiels, there's triangle and cymbals and drums and sleigh bells and chimes, all sorts of things in here.
And one more room?
One more room.
And finally?
Finally, the main chamber of the organ. And this is where most of our ensemble voices live. Again, we've got all the different strings and other pipe work down there. We've got more shutters. Over there we've got a whole bunch of tubas, which because there's one pipe for every note. That's the big thing to remember. And you probably wonder why it's so warm in here, because the organ is temperature controlled to keep it in tune.
This is industrial scale
music. Yeah, it is huge. A lot of real estate involved with these instruments. When you see these things in a million pieces, you look at them and you think, it's the biggest jigsaw puzzle you'll ever see. But when you start putting it together, there is actually a lot of logic to the way it's built.
But logic plays no part in the survival of what many might think is a relic of an age beyond bygone.
2 or 3 generations have never heard it. They don't know what it is. And this is what we're trying to do, is involve younger generation to hear what this is.
Gobsmacked, ear-smacked, eye-smacked. The Wurlitzer simply staggers, and those in the know reckon it'll keep doing just that.
I'm yet to find a limit for it, put it that way.
What would you say to the teenager today about listening and perhaps even playing this thing?
Come and play it.
Andrew Bell in Melbourne. I hope you've enjoyed this week's show. You can watch any of our stories again on iView or on our website. And we look forward to you joining us again next week for Australia Wide.